Welcome back to yet another episode going over some old weird Yu-Gi-Oh card effects. I do want to announce here that I actually made a playlist of all the other episodes in this series that you guys can check out. It's at the very top of my channel page, just in case you missed one of the episodes. Anyway, in the past, we've mostly done comparing and contrasting with old and new versions of the same card effects, but in today's video, I want to do something a little bit different. In today's video, we're talking about cards that are awkward to use. And basically what I mean by that is that these cards break the game in really weird and confusing ways, but breaking the rules doesn't always have to be super confusing. For example, double summon gives you an extra normal summon. That's pretty straightforward. It's not too confusing to use, but the cards in today's video, they are just very, very awkward. And in a few of these cases, these effects were never repeated ever again. First up, I probably should mention Darkness Approaches. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time talking about this card because I talked about it in the last episode, but yes, turning a monster into face down attack position is really, really weird. Luckily, these days this card does not actually do that anymore, but it was for a while the only card in Yu-Gi-Oh that dealt with face down attack position monsters. I will say that face down attack position actually could be pretty interesting. Maybe they could bring it back sometime, but I think that for the most part, this card's original text was basically just a mistake that didn't make a lot of sense. Next up, we have Convulsion of Nature, a continuous spell card that is very, very weird. Now, this is actually a card that people have requested me to talk about over and over again, so now I finally am. Convulsion of Nature is a continuous spell card that says, as long as this card remains face up on the field, both players must turn their respective decks upside down and proceed with the current duel. What's funny about Convulsion of Nature is that it doesn't really affect the duel that much. Sure, flipping over your deck is kind of weird, but basically the card just lets you see the top card of your deck every single turn. This actually was featured in some topping deck lists that used this to combo with cards like Archfiend's Oath to gain a bunch of advantage, but generally speaking, yeah, not a very competitive card. This mechanic of turning your entire deck upside down was never repeated in any other cards in Yu-Gi-Oh's history, so Convulsion of Nature is the only one that does that. Speaking of cards being upside down in decks, we have Parasite Parasite, and what a weird card. So this thing is a flip effect monster, an insect level 2 with 500 attack and 300 defense. Its flip effect says, put this card face up in your opponent's deck and shuffle it. When your opponent draws this card, it is special summoned to their side of the field and face up defense position and inflicts 1000 damage to them. Then, while this card is face up on the field, all monsters your opponent controls become insect type monsters. This is a very strange card for a few reasons. Being in the deck upside down isn't inherently impossible to deal with, but the main problem with this card that I feel like the design really failed on is that when you put this card into your opponent's deck, you might not have the same exact sleeves as them. It might not even be the same size of sleeves, let alone the same type of sleeves, and that creates a lot of problems. How do you realistically shuffle a deck with this thing in your deck when the sleeves are different? I suppose you could take an extra sleeve, maybe one from your side deck, and swap it out with whatever sleeve your opponent had on their Parasite Parasite, but in general, it's a very confusing and awkward card to actually use. I will say in Duel Links and other video games, this card actually doesn't really have an issue like that, and it works perfectly fine in those, and actually has seen a lot of competitive use in Duel Links. At least the last time that I was playing, a lot of players were using skills that used this card. But in the physical TCG, yeah, it is a nightmare for rulings and for shuffling issues and a whole bunch of other problems. I will say though, this effect actually was repeated kind of in two different cards, but they do make a really important change that I want to mention. Pharaoh's Treasure puts itself face up in your own deck, and Gravelore flips a card in your opponent's deck face up, and the big difference here is that neither of these cards has any cards changing the decks that they belong in. This means that while these cards are still kind of awkward to use, they're not nearly as awkward as Parasite Parasite because you at least know the cards that are being flipped up are in the original owner's possession in the correct sleeve. Next up, we have monsters that special summon themselves from the deck without your opponent really knowing what you're activating. That might sound kind of confusing, so let me give you an example. Red Eye's Black Metal Dragon is a dark machine monster with 2800 attack points and 2400 defense. It says, cannot be normal summoned or set, must first be special summoned from your deck by tributing Red Eye's B Dragon equipped with Metal Morph. Now the thing that makes this card so weird, as well as the other cards that have similar abilities like Dark Sage and the familiar possessed cards is that it doesn't start a chain. You don't actually have to tell your opponent what effect you're activating. It is an inherent summon. What that means is that in the situation where you have a Red Eyes Bee Dragon equipped with a Metal Morph, suddenly you can just pick up your deck and start going through it to special summon this card. That is very, very weird. In most situations, and pretty much all situations in Yu-Gi-Oh!, when a card special summons something from the deck, you at least know what you're activating. Your opponent gets to see what you're using. With something like Reborn Tengu, your opponent gets to read the effect before you start special summoning the monster from your deck. With something like these other cards though, that's not how it works. And this is pretty crazy because actually pretty recently we got another familiar possessed monster in 2018 that still has this ability. At least up until right now, none of these cards have ever been competitively viable, but Charmers are getting a structure deck in the OCG, so maybe we'll have to deal with these cards in the future in competitive events, which could be pretty awkward. It is just kind of weird that you get to pick up your deck without telling your opponent what you're doing, because in almost every other case in Yu-Gi-Oh! That's not how it works. And then we have Curse of Fiend, which I truly believe is one of the worst Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards in terms of design that we've ever seen in the game's history. This is a normal spell card that says, changes the battle position of all attack position monsters on the field to defense position and vice versa. These positions cannot be changed during the turn that this card is activated, except by the effect of a spell, trap, or effect monster card. You can activate this card only during your standby phase. For a very long time, I did not realize that Curse of Fiend actually does allow you to play it as a normal spell card during your standby phase. That did not make sense to me, and I really thought that you had to use some other effect to be able to use it during the standby phase, but that's not how it works. This makes zero sense. It is the only normal spell card in the entire game that can be used like this in the standby phase, and at the end of the day, all it needed was to be a quick play spell card, and then there's no issue. Next up, we have Weather Report, and eventually an Unfortunate Report, which is a trap card, but both of them have similar effects that cause a bunch of issues with other cards and how they're written. Let me explain what I mean. So Weather Report is an Aqua level 4 water monster with 950 attack and 1500 defense. This thing says flip, destroy all of your opponent's face-up Swords of Revealing Light cards on the field. If Swords of Revealing Light is destroyed, you can perform your battle phase twice this turn or your next turn if activated during your opponent's turn. Now, why is this so weird? Well, when you look at any card that mentions the battle phase, a lot of them are written in a very strange way. For example, Mermail Abyss Megalo, more of a modern release, says that it can make 2 attacks during each battle phase this turn. Notice that it says each battle phase instead of the battle phase. These two cards that will likely never see competitive play at a Yu-Gi-Oh! Tournament have essentially forced every single double attacker in the entire game to be written in a very strange way. And finally, let's talk about Harpie Lady 1, and also I should mention that Harpie Lady 2, 3, and Cyber Harpie Lady share the same confusing ability. On Harpie Lady 1, this card says in its effect, this card's name is always treated as Harpie Lady. Now, why is that confusing? I mean, it makes sense, right? You have all these Harpie Lady cards and Harpie Lady support cards, so naturally you should make them always be treated as Harpie Lady. Many of the newer Harpie Lady cards are treated as Harpie Lady while on the field or in the graveyard. That might not seem like a big important difference, but it is important because when you're building a deck in a Yu-Gi-Oh! You're only allowed to have up to 3 copies of the same card in your deck. Because those cards are always treated as Harpie Lady while in the deck, you can only ever have a total of 3 copies of any of them or the original Harpie Lady at a given time. This is a pretty big deal, and a lot of people have been confused about this, and even to this day they still are. Fusion Substitute is very similar. It's always treated as Polymerization while in the deck, which makes a lot of people not realize that you can't actually have 3 copies of Fusion Substitute and 3 copies of Polymerization, because while in the deck they are all just considered Polymerization. Honestly, I'm not convinced that this was the original plan for those Harpie Lady cards. I think the original idea was pretty much only that you could special summon them with Elegant Egotist, which I guess makes a lot of sense, but basically the result here is that no one ever wants to play Harpie Lady 2 or 3 because Harpie Lady 1 and Cyber Harpie Lady are better in every single way. Anyway, that is all for today's video, episode 4 of weird old school effects in Yu-Gi-Oh's history, and I just want to say this series has been a lot of fun to do. I want to continue it in different ways, like this episode, for example, was a little bit different than what you're used to, but I really think there's a lot to talk about with old school Yu-Gi-Oh effects and how they used to be written and how they've changed over the years. This video wasn't so much about new school text versus old school text though, it's more focusing on the design philosophies that have changed over the years. You really wouldn't see cards like Parasite Parasite or Convulsion of Nature in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Those types of effects are gimmicky and exciting for casual play, but in a competitive environment and in a competitive trading card game, they don't really make a lot of sense. Anyway, hopefully you guys enjoyed today's video. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.